Welcome to Stories from the Teacher's Desk. This is where educators connect, share, and grow.
In each episode, we share inspiring stories, practical strategies, and innovative solutions to empower teachers and transform classrooms around the world. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take interesting research and, we pull out the bits you can actually use.
Yeah, the golden nugget.
Exactly. Today, we're looking at something really core to teaching how to help students become better thinkers. Specifically, there's this study showing how teaching speaking and listening skills explicitly, or oracy, as it's often called, can seriously boost reasoning, especially for students who might be facing, extra hurdles.
Right. Stronger communication, sharper thinking. It makes sense intuitively.
Yeah, it does. And we've got some solid research to back it up today.
We have. We've been looking at a report from the University of Cambridge by Maliki Konteh. It's called Using Oracy to Improve Disadvantaged Student Attitudes, Engagement, and Reasoning.
Okay.
And it's set in a real school, an inner-city secondary Year 10 history class. So very practical, very classroom-focused.
That's what we like to see. So for all the teachers listening, you're always looking for ways to unlock that deeper understanding, right?
Of course.
Our mission here is to pull out the key bits from the study, the actual strategies, and maybe the why behind them, so you can think about how they might fit into your own practice.
It's about looking at classroom talk, something we all manage daily, but maybe through this specific lens of oracy and reasoning.
Yeah, a lens backed by some pretty interesting findings.
Definitely. You're the experts in your own classrooms, you know the dynamics. This research just offers a really focused look at one approach, using oracy, and how it might help build those critical reasoning skills we're all aiming for.
Okay, let's dive in then. Set the scene for us. Where did this study happen?
Right, so it was in a school in Eastern England, serving a community with significant levels of disadvantage. That's a key piece of context.
And language was a factor, too.
A big one. About half the students had English as an additional language.
Okay, so a challenging environment in some ways.
Yes, and the timing is important too. This was happening after all that disruption from remote learning during the pandemic.
Ah, right. Which probably didn't help with language skills.
Exactly. The researchers felt it had actually worsened some of the existing language gaps they were seeing. So getting back into the classroom, there was this real heightened need to address communication.
And they didn't just assume this, they checked it out first.
They did. They ran a pilot study initially, and it was, quite telling.
How so?
They found that when students were supposed to be discussing history, they often just read bits out of the textbook, verbatim.
Oh, right. We've probably all seen versions of that.
Yeah. It was like they didn't quite have the language tools or maybe the confidence to really process the info and say it in their own words, let alone, reason about it or build on what others were saying.
Interesting. And was this just the students with ELL or facing disadvantage?
Well, that's a key point. The pilot suggested it wasn't just limited to those groups. Many students, kind of across the board, defaulted to this reading aloud mode.
So it points to maybe a more general need for this kind of skill development for all students.
Potentially, yes. A need for more explicit support in developing that language, for learning, for reasoning.
Okay, so that leads us to this idea of exploratory talk. That was the core of their solution, right?
Exactly. That became the focus of their intervention.
Can you break that down a bit? What does exploratory talk actually mean in this context?
Sure. Think of it as a specific type of discussion. It's where students work together, critically but also constructively. Everyone's encouraged to chip in, even if ideas are just forming.
Tentative ideas are okay.
Yes, respected. But challenges are expected too, provided they're justified. You offer alternatives, you ask what others think, and crucially, the reasoning process itself becomes visible in the conversation.
So it's not just about the answer, but how you get there.
Precisely. And listening is key, really purposeful listening to understand and build on what's being said.
Okay, so they identified this need, defined this goal of exploratory talk. What did they actually do in the classroom? What did the intervention involve?
It was a series of 10 research lessons, all built around scaffolding this exploratory talk. Not just talk more, but structured activities.
Structure how? What were the key bits teachers might recognize or adapt?
Well, they used guided discussions with specific talk roles, like an interviewer, an interviewee, a moderator.
Ah, giving everyone a job in the conversation.
Exactly. Helps with participation and focus. They also did explicit modeling the teacher, and a co-researcher actually showed the students what a good reasoned discussion looked like.
Showing, not just telling. Powerful.
Very. And they had structured ground rules for talk. Not just be polite, but prompts to use reasoning language like, can you give evidence for that? Or explain your thinking.
Making the expectations explicit.
Yes. And finally, they used guiding questions for the conversations to keep them focused and push for deeper thinking on the topic.
Sounds very deliberate. The report mentions these lessons were iterative. What does that mean practically? How did they adjust things?
That's a really important aspect for teachers thinking about this. Iterative means it wasn't static. They'd plan a lesson, teach it, observe and record the student talk, and then they'd analyze that talk really closely. What worked, what didn't, where did students struggle? Based on that analysis, they'd tweak the design for the next lesson.
So a cycle of plan, teach, observe, analyze, refine.
Exactly.
Right.
Teachers acting like researchers in their own classrooms, constantly learning from what the students are doing and saying.
And they also zoomed in on a few specific students, these case pupils.
Yes, they tracked 3 students identified as disadvantaged really closely.
Why is that helpful?
It gave them deeper insights into the particular challenges some students might face with this kind of talk, seeing it through their eyes, essentially. This helped make the adjustments to the intervention more targeted, more effective for the students they were particularly focused on supporting.
Makes sense. It's about understanding those individual learning journeys.
Right, to inform the whole class approach.
Okay, so we've got the problem, the context, and the structured intervention. What about the results? Did it actually work? Did reasoning improve?
The evidence points to yes. The big finding was a definite shift. Compared to that pilot study, students were having much more meaningful discussions. Their ability to reason, justify, build on ideas, it clearly improved.
And they quantified this somehow.
They did. They analyzed the talk recordings and found that the amount of actual exploratory talk went up significantly. It reached 32% of all the interactions they coded.
Wow, 32%. That's quite a jump from just reading things out loud.
It is. It's a concrete measure of change.
And the report gives examples, right?
Yeah.
Can we look at one, transcript 1, about the Thomas Splint image in history? What does that show us?
Yeah, that one's interesting. What you see there is students actively prompting each other to reason, asking things like, what information in the source will help us? Or, why did you choose that bit?
So pushing beyond just surface-level answers.
Exactly. They're asking for justifications, linking claims back to the evidence. The researchers coded this as inviting reasoning, suggesting a view, justifying a view. It shows that analytical thinking happening collaboratively.
Much deeper engagement. And transcript 2? About the Treaty of Versailles, what's happening there?
There you see students moving into even more complex thinking. They start hypothesizing, thinking about what ifs.
Ah, okay.
Like one student says the treaty could have been done in a better manner.
Yeah.
That's not just agreeing or disagreeing, it's considering alternatives, consequences. It's higher level reasoning, cause and effect, different perspectives.
Yeah, that's a huge difference from the pilot study baseline. From reading aloud to hypothesizing alternatives, that structure clearly made a difference.
It seems so.
And it wasn't just the researchers noticing this, right? What did the students themselves say in the interviews?
The student voice is really powerful here. Their interviews showed they felt the difference. Several themes popped out.
Like what? What did they notice?
Well, one big thing was just finding it easier to get their thoughts out coherently. One student literally said, now it's easier to answer, to put your words into, whereas before it was all a little bit jumbled.
That's fantastic feedback. Like the structure helped organize their thinking.
It seems like it. They also felt their debating skills improved, being able to state an opinion and back it up.
Okay.
And they started seeing the connection, consciously, between the questions asked, interpreting the evidence, and giving a good answer with facts. Like one said, you think and interpret the question, and then actually give out a good answer with facts that back it up. They were becoming aware of the process.
And that structure, again, one student apparently said something about it making them have to reason.
Yeah, that quote was great. So it's like, you have to. It highlights how the guided structure created the conditions, maybe even the necessity, for them to engage that reasoning muscle in a way they might not have otherwise.
A productive push. Did they mention listening or learning from each other?
They did. He came through clearly. They recognized the value in actually listening to peers, picking up facts or perspectives they didn't have. One student said, when you're listening, your peers could tell you information that you couldn't have known, and then you learn.
So the collaborative aspect really landed for them.
It seemed so.
Yeah.
And ultimately, confidence.
Ah, yes. Did they feel more confident speaking up?
Several reported exactly that. I do feel more confident now after that, one said. Another, who was usually quiet, reflected, "I guess my confidence did improve, because usually I wouldn't be speaking as much." That's a huge outcome in itself.
Absolutely. Confidence unlocks so much else. Okay, so this is really compelling stuff for us teachers. Let's pivot to the practical implications. What can we take away and maybe try in our own classrooms?
Well, the big takeaway is that being intentional about teaching reasoning through structured talk really works. It's not just hoping discussion happens.
So what specific things from the intervention could teachers adapt?
Those core elements are very adaptable. Think about using talk roles. Maybe not always interview or interviewee, but maybe evidence checker, question asker, summarizer. Roles to structure participation.
Okay, different roles for different tasks.
Exactly. And modeling. Don't underestimate the power of showing students what good discussion looks like, maybe even role-playing it briefly.
Good point. And the ground rules.
Crucial. Make them explicit and focused on reasoning. Always explain why. Link your idea to the text. Ask others what they think. Things like that. Plus, those guiding questions to keep discussions focused and probing deeper.
These seem like things teachers could integrate into existing routines.
I think so. And remember, while the study focused on disadvantaged students, the benefits were seen across the class. These are likely good strategies for all students.
Universal design, almost.
In a way, yes. It's also interesting how the researchers themselves learned through this. They talk about meaning-oriented learning teachers, collaborating, observing student talk, analyzing it, and refining practice based on that evidence.
Like being researchers in our own practice.
Precisely. They even tried it in their department meetings, having teachers teach lessons to colleagues for feedback. They called it deliberate practice.
Interesting. Applying the principles to professional development.
Yeah, and they mentioned adapting anacracy ideas in MFL too, with group presentations using specific roles, which apparently boosted confidence there as well.
So transferable principles. One last interesting point you mentioned earlier was about identifying student need.
Ah, yes. The researcher noted that just relying on the official disadvantaged label might not be enough.
Why not?
Because in their context, with high levels of disadvantage overall, that label didn't always capture the specific linguistic needs. They suggested needing maybe more nuanced ways to assess and understand students' actual communication skills to target support effectively.
That's a really thoughtful point for us to consider in our own contexts. Okay, let's wrap this up. What's the main message, the core takeaway for teachers listening to this STEAM dive?
I think the core message is pretty clear and hopeful. If you intentionally create structured opportunities for students to practice reasoned talk, oracy, you can directly develop their reasoning skills. It's about giving them the tools and the space to think critically, express themselves clearly, and learn collaboratively.
And that leads to better engagement, more confidence.
Exactly. It's not just wishful thinking. This study provides solid evidence.
It really shifts the perspective, doesn't it? Speaking and listening aren't just background skills. They're active tools for thinking and learning. That's the aha for me.
Absolutely. So the final thought for everyone listening, think about your own classroom. Where are the opportunities for this kind of structured exploratory talk right now? How could you maybe borrow or adapt some of these ideas, the talk rules, the modeling, the ground rules, to help your students build their reasoning muscles, find their voice, and really learn from each other through conversation?
What might you discover by really tuning into the nuances of their talk?
Exactly. What could you learn about their understanding and about your own teaching by making classroom talk a deliberate focus? It's definitely something worth exploring. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and stay tuned for the next one.